Hi, welcome back to Hydroponics Daily. Today we're talking about sodium lamps and metal halide lamps. Now, a lot of people think that high pressure sodiums or HPS lamps are the same as street lamps, the sort of street lighting you used to get before LEDs came along. However, they are different. So street lights, low pressure sodiums, and they release an emission just in the orange part of the visible spectrum. So they're the ones that go pink when they first start up, and then they go bright orange. These aren't used as grow lights. You'll never see anyone running grow lights with low pressure sodiums. You might, it would work, but your plants would look a bit funny. There would be no red light, no blue in the spectrum. So we use high pressure sodiums, and high pressure sodiums were the grow light for decades. That's because they produced a good spectrum for plant growth. Not as good as sunlight, but still pretty good. Not a massive amount of green like you get with the fluorescents. So there's good red, good blue, and not too much far red. And they were compact. They produce a lot of light from a very small area. And so they heat up the sodium in there, and it ionizes, and it produces a wide spectrum and under high pressure. I think it's xenon gas in there as the starter gas. And you needed a ballast with them. So old style grow lamps used to weigh an absolute ton and were really heavy. And the new ones that have come out in the last, say, 10, 15 years are much lighter. However, they're still pretty big. They still require this big ballast, much bigger than the ballast on a fluorescent lamps. And so that's something to consider. You screw them in to the ballast, and you have to make sure you use gloves or paper towel as you're screwing them in, because the grease from your skin can affect and the lifespan of the sodium lamps. You have to keep them clean, dust free, because any contamination on the bulb will affect their lifespan. You also have a reflector because it's obviously producing light in 360 degrees, and so you reflect that back down onto your plants. And so these were used in both grow rooms and in industrial units and glass houses. And the other thing is they produce a lot of heat. So they're moderately efficient compared to other types of light, but they also produce this heat, and this infrared light was good at stimulating plant growth, and so it drove transpiration as it heated up the leaves. So it provided a heating effect as well. And so people moved towards more efficient lights, like LED lights. Sometimes they don't factor in the fact that your plant may have needed that direct infrared heat from the sodium lamps. So a lot of growers still use sodium lamps, especially greenhouse growers, because they need the heat, and the cost of changing all the electrics and putting in LED lights is significant. So lots of people still use sodium lamps, especially large growers. If you're a hydroponic grower growing in a grow tent, I would only use high pressure sodiums in the winter. The amount of heat produced in the summer would just make cooling too expensive, and you just want to move to LEDs. LEDs are so cheap now that for summer indoor grow room growing, it's the best option. So I said that's sodium lamps, good spectrum, not mainly in still, even though they're different to the low pressure sodiums, they've still got a good high level of yellow and orange in that spectrum. And then mercury vapor light, actually metal halide lamps, similar sorts of technology, produce a fairly similar spectrum, not massive amounts of red, again in the yellows, fair amount of green. I think they're used more in America than they are in the UK. Certainly in hydroponics they seem to be popular, metal halide lamps, but in greenhouses I think sodium lamps are more popular. Certainly gives a sort of truer white color than sodium lamps. So sodium lamps, even though they're high pressure, they still have that orange tint. Everything looks orange, whereas a metal halide lamp looks much whiter. And as I say, they will be less available than they were, because LEDs are taking over. So even though you might want to run a metal halide or a sodium lamp, you might find their availability diminishes. That's because the factories that make them are are shutting down. So low pressure sodiums, the lights that you used to see as street lamps. There was a big factory in Hamilton in Scotland, and that's now closed down, which is a shame for Hamilton because it's not got that much going for it, really. The football team's rubbish and it's not the nicest place in the world. So shame that they've closed the factory down. They couldn't move to LED lights. High pressure sodiums, I think, are still made, but not as much. And the problem is that Philips and Osram and companies like that made them, they didn't really want to innovate. They were selling enough of these products into warehouses that they weren't really innovating for grow lights. So they weren't optimizing the spectrum for grow lights, because they think, well, you can just suck it up. We're the people who have the monopoly on lights. If you want high pressure sodiums and metal halides, we're the ones that make it, and you have to get what we do. And so they might repackage them and put special branding on them for, say, special grow light, but they were often the same grow lights that were going into warehouses and industrial units and outdoor lighting and things like that. So they had it good for a long time, these companies. And then LED lights came along, and the small manufacturers could modify the spectrum and dramatically. And sort of they were caught on the back foot. They couldn't really start innovating because they were an established brand. And so that's another reason why sodium and metal halides went out of business. Also, one of the disadvantages compared to fluorescent lights is because they produce so much heat, you can't put any plastic films over them to modify the spectrum. So with fluorescents, certainly I used to do this, you could get far red absorbing or red absorbing films, so you can modify the red to far red ratio in your grow room, and you could put them over the fluorescent lights about 5 centimeters off the light and just cover the entire light. And so the light received by the plants had a much modified spectrum. You can't do that with the fluorescent. Sorry, you can't do that with the sodium because it would just burn the film. It would just melt. So that's one disadvantage. So that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Not my specialist subject, but if you probably know more about metal halide lamps than me, I'm not an expert. I've never used them to grow plants, but I have used high pressure sodiums. Again, just like fluorescents, do contain a small amount of mercury. So if they smash above your crop, then the dust that comes down could contain mercury. So you don't want to be consuming that crop. Tomorrow we'll probably cover LEDs if I have time to research it. Thank you very much for listening. Please like, follow, share, do all that gubbins, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.